Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's a simple question from Jesus' disciples recorded in the Gospel of John. But think about what they're asking. How could a man sin before he was born? The question itself seems to assume the pre-existence of the soul, a concept intimately connected with reincarnation. Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're exploring one of the most controversial topics in biblical scholarship: evidence for reincarnation in Christian scripture. For most modern Christians, reincarnation is an Eastern concept, foreign to biblical teaching. But is that historically accurate? Or was belief in the transmigration of souls once part of early Christian doctrine, only to be suppressed by later church authorities? Let's start with the most explicit reincarnation reference in the New Testament: Jesus' identification of John the Baptist as Elijah returned. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 11 verses 13 to 14, Jesus makes a remarkable statement about John the Baptist. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. This isn't metaphorical language. Jesus is directly identifying John the Baptist as Elijah, the Old Testament prophet who, according to 2 Kings chapter 2, never died, but was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. The prophecy Jesus references comes from Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, which states, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." But Jesus makes this identification even more explicit in Matthew chapter 17, after the transfiguration. The disciples ask him, "Why then do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" Jesus answers, "Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased." Matthew then adds, "Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist." This is a clear statement. Elijah returned as John the Baptist. John was Elijah reincarnated. How else can we interpret this passage? Now, skeptics point to the Gospel of John, chapter 1, where John the Baptist himself denies being Elijah. When priests and Levites ask him directly, "Are you Elijah?" he answers, "I am not." This seems to contradict Jesus' statement. But consider this: John the Baptist may not have been aware of his previous incarnation. In reincarnation traditions, most people don't remember their past lives. John's denial would simply reflect his lack of awareness, not disprove Jesus' identification of him as Elijah returned. Alternatively, some scholars suggest John was speaking literally. He wasn't Elijah in the same physical body, so technically he could deny being Elijah, while still being Elijah's soul in a new incarnation. Let's start with the most explicit reincarnation reference in the New Testament: Jesus' identification of John the Baptist as Elijah returned. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 11 verses 13 to 14, Jesus makes a remarkable statement about John the Baptist. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. This isn't metaphorical language. Jesus is directly identifying John the Baptist as Elijah, the Old Testament prophet who, according to 2 Kings chapter 2, never died, but was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. The prophecy Jesus references comes from Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, which states, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." The Jewish expectation of Elijah's return was central to messianic prophecy. Elijah was supposed to prepare the way for the Messiah. Jesus confirmed this prophecy was fulfilled in John the Baptist, but in a way that required reincarnation, rather than Elijah physically returning in the same body he'd left Earth in. Early Christian communities debated this intensely. If John was Elijah reincarnated, what did that mean for other souls? Was reincarnation a general principle, or was this a unique case for a prophet who had never died? The second major reincarnation reference appears in John chapter 9, in the story of the man born blind. Jesus and his disciples encounter a man who has been blind from birth, and the disciples ask, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Stop and think about that question. If the man was born blind, how could it be punishment for his sin? The only logical explanation is that the disciples believed the man could have sinned in a previous existence, before his current birth. Jesus' answer is intriguing, that it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Notice what Jesus doesn't do. He doesn't rebuke the disciples for asking a nonsensical question based on false premises. He doesn't say, "You fools, there's no such thing as pre-birth existence or karma from past lives." He simply explains that in this particular case, the blindness wasn't due to sin but would serve another purpose. This makes more sense when we understand the Jewish context. First-century Judaism included multiple perspectives on the afterlife and soul. The Pharisees, whom Jesus often debated with, believed in resurrection. The Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife at all. But there were also Jewish mystical traditions, precursors to later Kabbalah, that included beliefs about the pre-existence and transmigration of souls. The concept called Gilgul in Hebrew, the recycling or rolling of souls, appears in various Jewish mystical texts. While most of these were written down much later, they claim to preserve ancient oral traditions. The idea was that souls could return to Earth multiple times to perfect themselves or complete unfinished spiritual tasks. Some scholars point to passages in the wisdom literature that might reference pre-existence. The Book of Wisdom, part of the Apocrypha, accepted by Catholics and Orthodox, but not Protestants, states in chapter 8, verse 19 to 20, "Now I was a child, good by nature, and a good soul fell to my lot. Or rather, being good, I entered an undefiled body." This passage from Wisdom of Solomon suggests the soul exists before entering the body, and that a good soul can be born into a good body, implying some kind of karmic matching between the soul's quality and its physical incarnation. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, "Even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him." This suggests souls existed in some form before the foundation of the world. Similarly, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5 records God saying to the prophet, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you, and before you were born I consecrated you, I appointed you a prophet to the nations." While these passages don't explicitly teach reincarnation, they clearly indicate the pre-existence of souls before physical birth, a concept essential to reincarnation theology. The Book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the Bible, contains several passages that some interpret as referencing reincarnation or cyclical existence. Job chapter 1 verse 21 contains the famous line, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there." Now the traditional interpretation is that return there means return to the earth, to dust. But some scholars note the Hebrew is ambiguous and could mean returning to the womb itself, a reference to rebirth. More intriguingly, Job chapter 14 verses 14 to 15 states, "If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. You would call, and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands." The word translated as renewal in some versions is chalifa in Hebrew, which can mean relief, succession, or change. Some argue this suggests Job believed in some form of return or renewal after death. We need to understand that the ancient Israelites didn't develop their theology in isolation. They were surrounded by cultures, Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, many of which held beliefs about the soul's journey after death and potential return to earthly life. Egyptian religion included complex beliefs about the soul's journey through the duat, underworld, and the possibility of rebirth. The Egyptians believed in multiple components of the soul, and texts like the Book of the Dead describe elaborate processes of judgment and transformation. During the Babylonian exile, Jewish scholars would have been exposed to these ideas. Later, during the Persian period, Zoroastrian concepts about the soul, judgment, and cosmic cycles influenced Jewish thought. By the Hellenistic period, Greek philosophy had introduced concepts of metempsychosis, the Pythagorean and Platonic doctrines of the transmigration of souls. Plato's myth of Ea in the Republic describes souls choosing their next lives. These ideas circulated widely in the Mediterranean world during the time of Jesus. The Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, a contemporary of Jesus, wrote about the pre-existence of souls and their descent into bodies. His works attempted to synthesize Greek philosophy with Jewish theology, and he was widely read by early Christians. Now we come to one of the most controversial episodes in Christian history: the alleged condemnation of reincarnation at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 CE. Origen of Alexandria, who lived from approximately 185 to 254 CE, was one of early Christianity's most brilliant and prolific theologians. He wrote extensively on scripture, theology, and philosophy, and his works were hugely influential in shaping Christian doctrine. Origen explicitly taught the pre-existence of souls. He believed that souls existed in a spiritual realm before being incarnated in physical bodies. He also taught about apokatastasis, the eventual restoration of all souls, including Satan, to unity with God. This restoration might require multiple incarnations or existences to achieve. In his work De Principiis, on first principles, Origen discusses the pre-existence of souls and suggests that our current circumstances result from choices made in a previous spiritual state. While he's sometimes cautious in his language, the implication of multiple existences is clear in several passages. Origen taught that differences in people's earthly circumstances, why some are born into privilege and others into hardship, why some have natural virtues and others struggle with vice, could be explained by the soul's previous choices and developments. This wasn't just speculation. Origen saw it as the only way to reconcile God's justice with the apparent injustices of earthly life. If a baby is born with severe disabilities and dies in infancy, how is that just unless there's something we don't know about that soul's history? Now here's where it gets controversial. In 553 CE, the Second Council of Constantinople, called by Emperor Justinian, issued anathemas, formal condemnations, against various theological positions. 15 anathemas were directed against Origen and Origenism. The 9th anathema states, "If anyone shall say that the punishment of demons and of impious men is only temporary, and will one day have an end, let him be anathema." But here's the problem. There's significant scholarly debate about whether this council actually condemned the doctrine of pre-existence and reincarnation, or whether it only condemned specific interpretations that made salvation automatic, regardless of moral behavior. Some historians note that Pope Vigilius, who was in Constantinople at the time, refused to attend this council and didn't sign its decrees. The council's proceedings were conducted primarily in Greek, and for centuries there were questions about exactly what was decided. Moreover, the anathemas specifically target certain interpretations of Origen's teachings, particularly the idea that souls could eventually become demons, and demons could become angels, endlessly cycling through different forms. They may not have condemned the simpler idea of pre-existence or the soul having multiple earthly incarnations. Regardless of the historical details, what's clear is that after this period, reincarnation belief became increasingly unacceptable in mainstream Christianity. But the question remains, was it condemned because it was heretical, or because it was politically inconvenient? Some researchers argue that reincarnation belief was suppressed because it undermined church authority. If souls have many lifetimes to achieve salvation, the urgency of accepting church teachings in this lifetime diminishes. The doctrine of one life, one chance, with eternal consequences depending on your beliefs at death, gives tremendous power to the institution that claims to control access to salvation. This is speculative, of course, but it's worth considering how theological doctrines can serve institutional interests. In 1945, Egyptian farmers discovered a collection of ancient texts near the town of Nag Hammadi. These Gnostic Gospels and treatises, dating to the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, contain Christian texts that never made it into the canonical Bible. Many of them explicitly teach reincarnation and the pre-existence of souls. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the most famous Gnostic texts, contains sayings attributed to Jesus that aren't found in canonical Gospels. While it doesn't explicitly teach reincarnation, it emphasizes secret knowledge and spiritual transformation that transcends physical death. The Pistis Sophia, a longer Gnostic text, is much more explicit. It describes Jesus teaching his disciples about the transmigration of souls, explaining that souls can be reincarnated multiple times, and that certain sins result in being reborn into difficult circumstances. In the Pistis Sophia, Jesus explains, the soul that has received mysteries can go forth and pass through all the regions, but souls that have not received mysteries must return to earth again and again until they receive them. The text describes a cosmic hierarchy where souls progress through multiple incarnations, learning lessons and purifying themselves until they achieve the gnosis, knowledge, necessary for final liberation. The Secret Book of John, another Nag Hammadi text, describes how souls descend from the divine realm into physical bodies and must struggle to return. It presents a cosmology where reincarnation is part of the soul's journey back to its divine origin. Why were these texts excluded from the Bible? The standard explanation is that they represent heretical distortions of true Christian teaching composed by Gnostic sects that mixed Christianity with Greek philosophy and pagan mystery religions. But another perspective suggests these texts represent alternative early Christian communities with different theological emphases. The winners in theological disputes, those who gained institutional power, determined which texts were canonical and which were heretical. The process of canon formation wasn't completed until the 4th century CE. Before that, different Christian communities used different texts, emphasized different teachings, and held different beliefs about fundamental questions like the nature of salvation, the person of Christ, and the destiny of the soul. Even some apocryphal texts that are less radically Gnostic contain reincarnation references. The Acts of John describes Jesus teaching about the cycles of existence. Various agrapha, sayings of Jesus not found in canonical Gospels, but preserved in other early Christian writings, hint at reincarnation. Clement of Alexandria, an Orthodox Church father, preserved a saying of Jesus that appears nowhere in canonical Scripture. Ask great things, and the small shall be added unto you. Ask heavenly things, and the earthly shall be added unto you. This and other preserved sayings sometimes contain cosmological teachings not found in the Bible as we have it. Now let's explore the numerological patterns in Scripture that some interpret as encoding knowledge about soul cycles and reincarnation. Throughout the Bible, certain numbers appear with remarkable frequency. 3, 7, 12, 40, 70, and their multiples. These aren't random. They carry symbolic meaning, and some esoteric interpreters argue they encode information about spiritual cycles, including the cycles of reincarnation and soul development. The number 7 appears constantly in Scripture. 7 days of creation, 7 years of plenty and famine, 7 churches in Revelation, 70 times 7 for forgiveness. In esoteric numerology, 7 represents completion of a cycle and spiritual perfection. A text from the early 20th century, the mystical Kabbalah, by Dion Fortune, explores how Hebrew letters and numbers encode spiritual principles. The book discusses how biblical numerology was understood by mystical Jewish scholars to represent cosmic laws and soul development patterns. According to this interpretation, the number 7 relates to the 7 classical planets, the 7 chakras, energy centers in Hindu and later Western esoteric traditions, and the 7 stages of spiritual development a soul must pass through. The number 12 appears throughout Scripture. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples, 12 gates of the New Jerusalem in Revelation. 12 represents the zodiac, the 12-fold division of the heavens. In reincarnation theology, some taught that souls might need to incarnate under each zodiacal sign to gain complete experience. The number 40 is particularly significant. 40 days and nights of the flood, Moses on Mount Sinai for 40 days, Israel wandering in the wilderness 40 years, Jesus fasting 40 days, 40 days between resurrection and ascension. In numerology texts like The Secret Science of Numbers, 40 represents a period of testing, trial, and transformation. Some interpreters see it as representing the time period of a single incarnation or spiritual cycle. Not necessarily 40 literal years, but a complete cycle of experience and growth. 70 is another crucial number. Jesus sends out the 70 disciples, 70 elders of Israel, 70 years of Babylonian exile. Some numerological interpretations suggest 70 represents the complete number of soul incarnations needed for spiritual perfection, of fullness of earthly experience. The Jubilee system in Leviticus is particularly interesting. Every 7 years was a sabbatical year, and after 7 cycles of 7 years, 49 years, the 50th year was the Jubilee, when debts were forgiven and Hebrew slaves were freed. Some esoteric interpreters see this as encoding a soul cycle. 7 incarnations of 7 years each, symbolically, equals 49 stages of development, followed by the Jubilee, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, what Hinduism calls moksha and Buddhism calls nirvana. The Kabbalistic text Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, which dates to somewhere between the 2nd and 6th centuries CE, discusses how the Hebrew alphabet and numbers encode the structure of reality. Each of the 22 Hebrew letters has a numerical value, and words with the same numerical value are considered to have mystical connections. The theology of arithmetic, compiled from Pythagorean sources, explains how ancient mystery schools used numbers to encode spiritual teachings. According to this tradition, initiates learn to read the numerical patterns in sacred texts as a second layer of meaning beneath the literal narrative. For astrological practice, understanding these numerical cycles was considered essential. A text called The Science of the Stars and the Soul, drawing on various medieval sources, suggests that recognizing these biblical number patterns helps astrologers understand soul cycles. When souls typically incarnate, how long incarnations last, and what triggers the transition between lives. Now, I need to emphasize, this numerological interpretation is highly speculative. Many of these number correspondences can be explained by the cultural significance of numbers in ancient Near Eastern societies without needing to invoke reincarnation. The number 7 was considered perfect by many ancient cultures, not necessarily because of some hidden reincarnation knowledge. However, what's undeniable is that ancient peoples, including biblical authors, used numbers symbolically and believed they encoded spiritual principles. Whether those principles include reincarnation cycles is where interpretation and belief come into play. Let's examine what various early Christian theologians actually said about reincarnation and pre-existence of souls. We've already discussed Origen extensively, but he wasn't alone in entertaining these ideas. Justin Martyr, writing in the 2nd century, engaged with Greek philosophical concepts, including the pre-existence of souls, though he didn't fully endorse reincarnation. Clement of Alexandria, Origen's teacher, wrote in his Stramata about the soul's journey and progression. While careful in his language, he suggests the soul exists before embodiment and continues its development after death. He states, the soul, being of divine origin, when it departs for another place, is able to change according to the character of its habitation. Interestingly, even Augustine of Hippo, who strongly opposed reincarnation doctrine, acknowledged it was a widespread belief in the early church. In his letter to Jerome, Augustine discusses various views on the soul's origin, including pre-existence and traducianism, souls being generated from parents' souls. Augustine ultimately rejected these ideas, arguing for creationism that God creates each soul individually at conception or birth. But the fact that he needed to argue against pre-existence so extensively shows how prevalent the belief was. Jerome, another influential church father, translated the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate. In his commentaries, he sometimes mentions reincarnation beliefs among early Christians, though he personally opposed them. His writings show that into the 4th and 5th centuries, debate continued about whether souls pre-existed and whether they could incarnate multiple times. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocian fathers, taught about the soul's progressive purification after death. While not explicitly endorsing reincarnation, his concept of post-mortem soul development through multiple stages bears similarities to reincarnation theology. Even after official condemnation, reincarnation beliefs persisted in various Christian movements. The Cathars, a medieval Christian sect in southern France, believed in reincarnation. They taught that souls were originally angelic beings who fell into the material world and must undergo multiple incarnations to purify themselves and return to heaven. The Cathars were eventually exterminated in the Albigensian Crusade, but their existence shows that reincarnation never completely disappeared from Christian thought. During the Renaissance, Christian humanists re-engaged with Platonic philosophy, bringing pre-existence concepts back into intellectual discourse. Figures like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola explored these ideas, trying to reconcile them with Christian orthodoxy. In more recent centuries, various Christian mystical and esoteric movements have reintroduced reincarnation. Some Christian spiritualists in the 19th century, theosophists who tried to synthesize Christianity with Eastern religions, and modern New Age Christians have all embraced reincarnation while maintaining Christian identity. So, does the Bible teach reincarnation? The honest answer is, it's complicated. There are passages that clearly indicate the pre-existence of souls, that souls exist before physical birth. There are passages, particularly Jesus' identification of John the Baptist as Elijah, that seem to explicitly teach reincarnation. There are questions asked by Jesus' disciples that only make sense if they believed in pre-existence and karmic consequences from previous lives. However, there are also passages that seem to contradict reincarnation. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27 states, "It is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment." This is often cited as biblical proof against reincarnation. The counter-argument is that this passage speaks to the general principle of mortality, not specifically excluding the possibility of multiple incarnations. Moreover, even in reincarnation theology, each individual life ends in death and judgment. What's reborn is a renewed soul in a new body, not the same person continuing indefinitely in the same form. What we can say with confidence is that early Christianity was much more diverse in its beliefs than most modern Christians realize. Different communities emphasized different teachings, used different texts, and held different views on fundamental questions. Reincarnation belief was present in some early Christian communities, was entertained by major theologians like Origen, and persisted in various forms despite official condemnation. Whether this represents a lost, authentic Christian teaching or a heterodox corruption depends largely on your theological commitments. From a historical perspective, the suppression of reincarnation doctrine appears to have been partly theological. Some church leaders genuinely believed it contradicted core Christian teachings, and partly political as it coincided with the consolidation of church institutional authority. Today, some Christians have rediscovered these early reincarnation teachings and incorporate them into their faith. They argue that reincarnation actually makes Christian teachings more coherent, explaining apparent injustices, providing more time for souls to achieve salvation, and making God's judgment seem more merciful. Orthodox Christianity continues to reject reincarnation as incompatible with Christian doctrine. The emphasis on the uniqueness of each person, the resurrection of the body, and the finality of Christ's sacrifice doesn't fit easily with reincarnation theology. The numerological patterns we discussed, whether you view them as encoding actual soul cycle knowledge or as symbolic religious teaching, remind us that ancient peoples thought deeply about cycles, patterns, and spiritual progression. They embedded their wisdom in texts, numbers, and symbols that continue to intrigue us millennia later. Perhaps the real lesson isn't whether the Bible definitively teaches reincarnation or not, but rather that spiritual truth is complex, that ancient peoples grappled with profound questions about the soul's nature and destiny, and that reasonable people can interpret the same texts in different ways. The passages we've examined, Jesus and Elijah John, the man born blind, the numerological patterns, remain in Scripture for anyone to read and interpret. Whether you see them as evidence of reincarnation doctrine or something else entirely depends on the hermeneutical lens you bring to the text. Thanks for watching this exploration of reincarnation references in the Bible. This is obviously a controversial topic, where sincere believers disagree. So I encourage you to research further, read the original texts, and form your own conclusions. If you found this video thought-provoking, please like and subscribe for more content on ancient and medieval history, religious history, and the mysteries of ancient texts. Let me know in the comments what you think. Does the Bible teach reincarnation, or have we misinterpreted passages with different original meanings? I've included academic sources on early Christian theology, reincarnation in Christian history, and biblical interpretation in the description below, along with references to the historical numerological texts we discussed. Remember, exploring historical religious diversity doesn't require you to change your beliefs. It just helps us understand how varied human spiritual thought has always been. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the ancient world.